Hello, I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports, and welcome to another edition of the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. It is week 6, and it is time for hot plays, fades, and sleepers. Joined by my son, Henry Paur. As always, Henry, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, no problem. It's always fun.
Always a lot of fun to talk with you about the week ahead, give you our favorite plays, some of our fades, some of our sleepers. We're in week 6 already.
Yeah.
Can't believe it. It's flying by. There's actually some division games this week, but there's some not so good games this week. I hate to say it.
Yeah, this is a pretty poor week besides a couple games. Good ones, though. We have Baltimore and Washington. That should be a fun one. Jaden and Lamar. Besides that, I guess
Dallas.
Detroit. Yeah.
Detroit. That's the other one that sticks out to me.
Maybe Green Bay, Arizona's a little competitive.
Yeah.
Arizona just came out and beat San Fran. Maybe the Thursday night game could be good, too. Seattle and San Fran. But
let's talk about a couple quarterback changes before we get into it. So Drake May goes to New England. He's going to start. Aiden O'Connell's named the starter in Las Vegas as well. Move the needle at all for you?
Not really. New England, I feel like the pretty poor decision on their part. Jacoby Brissett was pressured on 48% of his dropbacks, so I feel like you're just throwing a rookie out there to die at that point.
That's true.
You're going to kind of ruin his confidence. We saw what happened to Bryce Young. Then it kind of ruined his. Aiden O'Connell, I don't think you can go wrong trying him out.
I don't think that's a bad move.
I mean, they're going to equal out, it seems like, but maybe one's better than the other. And then there's still one more. It seems like Spencer Rattler is going to get the start in New Orleans. I'm actually excited to see him play. I think he had a great preseason. Their offense has been good with Derek Carr. I think it could be good with Spencer Rattler. I somewhat thought that he may get a chance if Carr struggled this year already. And I'm excited to see him play this weekend.
Yeah, so, I mean, from a fantasy perspective, you're in a 2-quarterback league. I'd definitely go get Spencer Rattler. I think he probably has the most upside of those options. Aiden O'Connell's not bad either, though. He's produced some big numbers at times. I don't think it's a bad move starting him because Minshew's been just kind of meh.
Yeah, it does hurt that you wanted Devontae Adams. We don't know really what's happening in that situation because now Antonio Pierce said today that he's always been a Raider. He always will be a Raider. But
we'll see.
I don't know what's going on anymore.
I agree. All right, let's get into the hot plays now. So Henry and I are going to give you a QB, running back, receiver, and tight end. Then we're going to give you 3 fades, players we don't like, you might want to bench, and then 2 sleepers. So we start with the QB. I'll let you go first, Henry. Who's your QB?
I have Caleb Williams of the Bears. Last week was his best game of the year as his first year under center for the Bears, and he looked great. 300 yards, I think 2 touchdowns. And now this week it's Jacksonville, who statistically has been basically the best defense for anyone to play against in fantasy this year. Yep. They're bottom 5 against the run, and they're the worst against the pass, quarterbacks and wide receivers. I'm excited to see him play in this one. Hope he build on his game last week. Game in London should be a fun one. I'm excited to see him play this week.
So I'm going to pick a QB that hopefully you played last week, but I think he's going to build on it and play well again this week, and it's Kirk Cousins. He finally looked healthy, in my opinion, getting the ball out on time, threw for more than 500 yards and 4 touchdowns in that game, top 40 fantasy points. I think he's finally rounded into form in that offense, and he plays Carolina this week. They're a mess. They allow the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, 22nd overall against the pass. I think Cousins is going to have another good game. He's not going to get 500-plus passing yards again, but I think he's going to play well. All right, Henry, who's your running back hot play?
I have Josh Jacobs. It seems like since Jordan Love's return, we're finally getting the Josh Jacobs we kind of expected to see. He has back-to-back weeks with double-digit fantasy points. And the one 2 weeks ago was especially a good game because they didn't have a chance to run the ball. They were down 28 points at half, and they had to throw it. He had like 4 catches or something. And this week, he really got a bulk of the carries. He had 20-plus carries, a catch or 2, and a touchdown. He's getting the goal line work, and offense is just going to get better, surrounded by Jordan Love and those weapons. I think Josh Jacobs is a great matchup this week. It's Arizona, who's bottom 5 against the run.
I like Tony Pollard a lot this week. They're coming out of a bye. He's really been solid to start his career with Tennessee. He had a season-best 88 rushing yards his last game, topped 100 total yards in that game. He has 15-plus fantasy points, 3 or 4 games, just super consistent. And he plays the Colts. They've been a mess against the run. They allow the 9th most fantasy points of running backs, 31st against the run, allowing 57 rushing yards per game. I think Pollard and even Tajay Spears are good plays in this matchup. I think Tennessee's going to want to take the air out of the ball with Levis making so many mistakes. All right, Henry, who's your receiver hot play?
I have Zay Flowers, who plays Washington this week, and what I expect to be another shootout for Baltimore, as last week they had a real great game with Cincinnati. Both teams scored 40-plus points. Now they play Washington, who's got the defense look better, but it is Baltimore, I'll put it like that. And they're very bad against the pass. I expect Zay Flowers to put big numbers again like he did last week in what should be a shootout versus Washington. I'm excited to see that game and see what Zay Flowers can do in this one.
So ironically, I picked the opposite team in that matchup because, like you, I think it's going to be a high-scoring game, a lot of fantasy points. And it's Terry McLaurin. He's my receiver to click this week. I think he's really starting to get on the same page with Jaden Daniels. He has 100-yard games, 2 of his last 3, at least 14 fantasy points, 3 straight games after 2 really mediocre games to start the year. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game. Baltimore's really struggled against the pass this year. They're 31st against the pass, allow 280.2 passing yards per game. I think Washington's going to have to throw to move the ball. I think McLaurin has a big week 6. Let's talk about the fun and exciting tight end position. It's starting to get a little better, I feel like, but who's your option for this week?
I have Kyle Pitts. Last week was a great game out of him. I know it was a game where Cousins threw 50-plus passes and had 500 yards, but Pitts looked like he's on the same page as Cousins a lot in that game. And if Cousins is going to return to that Minnesota form where he loved to target Hawkinson and that big tight end, I think Pitts could be great going forward. This week he has Carolina. I hope he uses this great matchup to bolster his status with Kirk Cousins.
All right, I like Pitts too. I like George Kittle. He's my favorite tight end for this week. He was banged up last week, managed to play, and still produced very well. He topped 20 fantasy points for the second time this season. He has touchdowns each of the last 3 games he has played. I know Ayuk and Samuel are back, but Kittle's still producing well with all those mouths to feed in that offense. And they play Seattle this week, a team that allows the 12th most fantasy points to tight ends. They've struggled to stop that position. I think Kittle's targeted. He gets some red zone looks and scores a touchdown in week 6. All right, Henry, the opposite end of things. So we're talking about fades, players you might consider benching this week. I know teams are on a bye, so it's kind of tough times to bench some marquee players, but we got a couple guys that we think we're not too high on this week. Who's your first fade?
So I know this game's going to be a shootout and everything, but I don't know how much I trust Brian Robinson. Seems like he's really dealing with his knee injury. I know he had 2 touchdowns last week, but he only had 7 carries for 18 yards. He seemed to not be very involved in the ground. It seemed like they're trying to work him through this injury. Eckler was involved. McNichols was involved. I think they may are going to tone his work down again. And yes, he'll maybe get the goal line carries, but I worry about his production outside of that if he can't score a touchdown this week.
Could be a boomer bust touchdown-dependent player. I agree with you there. So my first fade is a guy that it's going to be hard to bench him, but if you have better options, comparable options, I would consider it because the numbers don't lie. And right now, Josh Allen is not helping fantasy teams. He has fewer than 16 fantasy points, 2 straight games, hasn't hit that mark 3 of the last 4 games. So he's really struggled of late to produce very well in this offense. He has 185 or fewer passing yards 3 of 4 games. So he's not even getting many chances to push the ball down the field. Doesn't seem to be on the same page as all his receivers. His favorite receiver, Khalil Shakir, is hurt. He's banged up. He's still not practicing. I don't think he's going to play. Again, it's hard to bench Allen because he has so much potential because of his running ability, but I think he's going to have a mediocre time throwing the ball against the Jets, who allow the fewest fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So if you have better options on your bench, I seriously would consider playing them in week 6. All right, Henry, who's your next fade?
I have Chuba Hubbard. I know he's been elite so far with Andy Dalton getting added to the offense, but Andy Dalton has seemed to slow down these last 2 weeks. And they have a tough matchup against Atlanta, who's been very good against the run this year. And I'd be worried about Chuba in this one, because if they can't get it going through the run to start that game, they're going to get behind quick, and they're going to have to throw the ball. And I worry about Chuba being able to produce in this matchup versus Atlanta.
So I don't like J.K. Dobbins of the Chargers. He's really kind of cooled since his hot start. He has fewer than 45 rushing yards, 2 straight games, failed to hit double-digit fantasy points either of those games. He is getting the most work in the Chargers running game, but I still don't think he's a great play this week against a very stingy Broncos defense. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I could see it being like 9-6 or 10-6, just a terrible offensive showing for both teams, Denver and the Chargers. So I'm kind of staying away from all players in this matchup, including J.K. Dobbins. Who's your last fade for this week?
I have Jackson Smith-Njigba of the Seattle Seahawks. He has a tough matchup this week against the 49ers. Last week he was saved by a touchdown late in the game when they were behind trailing the Giants. which is really tough to see that offense not doing much against that defense. And now they go and face the 49ers, who we know what their defense is. It's pretty elite, one of the best in football. If their offense isn't able to get going like it was 2 weeks ago against Detroit, how it's stalled, I'd be very worried about JSN in this one.
So I got another fade on my list who's actually been really good lately, but what worries me is that people are getting healthy around him, and that's Dallas Goedert. So Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, they're expected back this week. So without those guys in the lineup, Goedert has 17 receptions for 232 yards and 19 targets his last 2 games. With those guys in the lineup, he has 7 catches for 69 yards and has failed to hit 8 fantasy points in either of those games. So it's a concern. I think he's going to be a boomer bust play, kind of drive fantasy owners crazy, much like he has over the last few years. He's going to have some huge games, so it's going to help his numbers in the end. I'm not sure he does it this week against the Browns, though. They have allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to tight ends. I know they're a bit of a dumpster fire right now, but that defense is still pretty solid, especially against the tight end. So I worry about Goedert in this matchup. All right, Henry, sleeper time. So a couple guys maybe flying under the radar, might not be at the top of a lot of people's rankings, but could produce well this week. Who's your first?
I have Dalton Schultz. Nico Collins is now down and out for the next 4 weeks, going on IR. And Schultz seemed to eat up some of those targets when he went down in that game last weekend against Buffalo. And I think he's going to eat in this one against New England. He's been very poor against the pass so far this year. Schultz going to get a bulk of the targets, it seems like. After Nico goes down, he's going to look for that big tight end target. It's a security blanket. Stroud will, and I like him a lot. They could be a great sleeper play this week, especially, like you said, if you don't want to play Goddard with all those weapons coming back, and if you have a good plug-and-play if you have Kelsey on a bye. I love Schultz this week.
That's a good call on Schultz with, like you said, with Nico Collins out. I think it makes a difference. He could get some more looks. He hasn't gotten a lot of looks to date, but he was good last year at times. My first sleeper is Daniel Jones of the New York Giants. It scares me to recommend him, but just because of his track record in the past, but he's played really well lately. He has 20-plus fantasy points, 3 of his last 4 games, multiple touchdowns, 3 of those games as well. He's playing the Bengals. They've been awful defensively this year. They allow the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, just terrible against the pass. I think Jones has another good showing. He produced last week without Malik Nabers. Nabers has a chance to come back this week. He still hasn't cleared a concussion protocol. I think he's getting close, though, and if he comes back, makes that offense even more potent. So I like Jones as a bye-week replacement in Week 6. Who's your last sleeper for this week, Henry?
I have Roma Dunze of the Bears. He had its okay week last week, but now he goes to faces Jacksonville, who I said earlier, they've been terrible defensively this year. They've been a great play for people, fantasy-wise. I talked about Caleb earlier. I think he's going to look Dunze's way in this one. They looked really good last week throwing the ball. Dunze should get more and more looks. I think he's going to keep getting targeted downfield. We may see one of those games he had a couple weeks ago. Who was that against? Can't remember who they played. But
yeah, they had 300-yard passing game.
Against,
Williams has had 300-yard passing games 2 of his last 3, but you're right.
Yeah,
was it the Colts?
It was the Colts. Dunze had like 28 points. He looked beautiful against that very poor pass defense. And I have another matchup just like that, and I think Dunze shines again in this one.
All right, my last sleeper is a receiver as well. It's Jalen Tolbert. His stock is just going up. He's still available in a lot of leagues. I don't think that's going to be the case after this week. But he's starting now with Brandon Cooks out. Top 20 fantasy points last week. Had 7 catches for 87 yards and a score. He has 13-plus fantasy points 3 of his last 4 games, and that was when Cook was on the field. So he's out. Cooks is out. He's the number 2 receiver in Dallas. They throw the ball a lot. They can't run very well, and they're playing Detroit this week. This should be a shootout. I'm getting all offensive players involved on both these teams, and I love Tolbert's chances and the passing game in Dallas against the Lions, who have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points of receivers, really struggled against the pass much of the season. Henry, that's our hot plays, fades, and sleepers for Week 6. Thanks so much, as always, for coming on. Good luck to you in all your games this week.
Yeah, no problem. Good luck to you as well.
Appreciate that, and I appreciate everybody watching out there. Again, have a great Week 6. Enjoy the games. Remember, Thursday game, we have another early London game as well, so get those lineups in, get everything set before those games start. Again, good luck this week. This has been Jeff Paur with RealTime Fantasy Sports. Have a great day.